Formula One has a problem, and the drivers just exposed it. Right after the Japanese Grand Prix, multiple drivers started saying the same thing. The cars are harder to drive than ever, but somehow, less rewarding. And that contradiction is exactly why tension inside the FIA is now exploding. Because this isn't one frustrated driver. This is a pattern. A growing list of drivers who feel disconnected from the cars, from the racing, and from the sport itself. And here's the part that changes everything. The best driver in the world just asked a question no one in Formula One wants to answer. Is it worth it? That's not about performance. That's about leaving. Which means this is no longer a technical issue. This is a crisis. Because if drivers stop enjoying Formula One, then Formula One has a much bigger problem than bad regulations. Subscribe now, because what's happening behind the scenes could change the sport faster than anyone expects. At first, the FIA didn't see it as a crisis. Because on paper, everything was working. The cars were faster. The technology was more advanced. The regulations were doing exactly what they were designed to do. More efficiency. More control. More sustainability. From the outside, it looked like progress. But inside the cockpit, it felt completely different. Because what drivers started reporting wasn't just difficulty. It was confusion. Moments where the car didn't respond the way instinct said it should. Moments where pushing harder didn't make you faster, it made you slower. And that breaks one of the most fundamental rules of racing. Because in Formula One, pushing the limit is supposed to be rewarded, not punished. But now, drivers are constantly balancing systems. Energy deployment, battery recovery, thermal windows, all happening at the same time, in every lap. And that changes how you drive. Not emotionally, but mechanically. You stop reacting. You start calculating. And that shift is exactly what drivers are struggling with. Because the car is no longer something you feel. It's something you manage. But here's where it becomes even more serious. Because this isn't something experience fixes. Normally, when new regulations arrive, drivers adapt. They learn. They improve. They find the edge again. But this time, that edge feels different. Less natural. Less intuitive. And that's why even the best drivers are struggling. Because this is not about skill. It's about compatibility. Compatibility between driver instinct and machine behavior. And right now, that connection is breaking. But here's the detail that changed everything inside the FIA. Because this frustration didn't stay isolated. It started repeating. Driver after driver. Different teams. Different cars. Same message. The car doesn't do what I expect. And when multiple drivers say the same thing, it stops being feedback. It becomes evidence. Evidence that something deeper is wrong. But now, let's go one level further. Because the real issue is not just what drivers are saying. It's how they're saying it. Less emotion. More clarity. More direct. Because this is no longer frustration in the moment. This is understanding. Drivers are starting to understand exactly what they don't like. And once that clarity appears, it becomes very difficult to ignore. Because now, it's not just complaints. It's a diagnosis. And that diagnosis points directly at the regulations. The very foundation of this era. Which means the problem is not on track. It's built into the sport itself. And that's where the tension inside the FIA starts to rise. Because fixing a car is one thing. Fixing the rules is something else entirely. And that's exactly where the situation starts to break. Because once the problem is identified, someone has to take responsibility. And in Formula One, that responsibility leads directly to one place. The FIA. Because these rules didn't appear randomly. They were designed, approved, implemented with a clear vision of what the sport should become. More sustainable, more efficient, more technologically advanced. But now, that vision is being questioned. Not by fans, not by media, by the drivers themselves. And that changes everything. Because drivers are not just participants. They are the final filter of reality. If something doesn't work for them, it doesn't work. No matter how good it looks on paper. But here's where the tension inside the FIA becomes real. Because admitting a problem means opening the door to change. And change at this level is complicated. Extremely complicated. Because every regulation is connected. Engines, aerodynamics, energy systems. You can't adjust one thing without affecting everything else. And that creates a dangerous situation. Because now, the FIA is trapped between two realities. On one side, the regulations are working as intended. On the other, the drivers are rejecting how they feel. And those two things cannot coexist for long. But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because the FIA has seen this before. Moments where the sport drifts too far in one direction. Moments where drivers start losing connection. And every time that happens, the sport is forced to correct itself. But corrections take time. And right now, time is the one thing they don't have. Because the pressure is building faster than expected. Race after race. Statement after statement. Driver after driver. And now, it's no longer something they can manage quietly. Because the narrative is changing. From adaptation to resistance. And resistance inside Formula One is dangerous. Because once drivers stop adapting, they start pushing back. Through interviews. Through meetings. Through collective pressure. And that's exactly what's beginning to happen. But here's the detail that makes this even more critical. Because drivers are not just asking for changes. They are comparing eras. Talking about how the sport used to feel. How driving used to be more direct. More instinctive. And those comparisons are powerful. Because they don't just criticize the present. They redefine expectations. And once expectations change, the current system starts to look worse. Even if it hasn't changed. But now, everything leads to one unavoidable moment. Because sooner or later, the FIA will have to respond. Not with statements. Not with explanations. But with action. Real changes. Adjustments to the regulations. And that's where the real risk begins. Because if they change too little, nothing improves. If they change too much, they admit failure. And in Formula One, both options carry consequences. But here's the final piece. The one that connects everything. Because this tension is not just about rules. It's about trust. Trust between drivers and the sport. Trust that what they're driving represents the best version of racing. And right now, that trust is starting to crack. And once that happens, fixing the rules is no longer enough. Because now, you have to rebuild belief. And that is far more difficult than rewriting any regulation. Because if the drivers stop believing in what Formula One is becoming, then the real danger is not the rules. It's what happens when no one wants to follow them anymore. And this is where everything reaches its most dangerous point. Because once trust starts to break, drivers stop just talking. They start acting. Quietly at first. Small decisions. Subtle changes. But decisions that reveal what they really think. And we've already seen the first signs. Drivers choosing different priorities. Looking outside Formula One. Exploring other categories. Not as a backup, but as a real alternative. And that changes everything. Because for the first time in years, Formula One is no longer the only place drivers want to be. Now think about what that means. If the pinnacle of motorsport starts being compared, and not always winning that comparison, then something fundamental has shifted. Because Formula One has always had one advantage. It was the ultimate goal. The final destination. The place every driver wanted to reach and stay. But now, that certainty is fading. And the FIA can feel it. Because this is no longer about improving racing. It's about protecting relevance. But here's where the situation becomes even more fragile. Because drivers are starting to align. Not officially. Not publicly. But in mindset. The same frustrations. The same concerns. The same feeling that something is not right. And when drivers align like that, it creates pressure. Collective pressure. The kind that's very difficult to ignore. Because one driver can be dismissed. Two can be questioned. But when it becomes a pattern, it becomes a problem. And right now, it's becoming a pattern. But now we arrive at the most critical moment of all. Because the FIA is approaching a decision point. Not announced. Not scheduled. But inevitable. Do they stay on this path? Or do they change direction? Because continuing as they are means accepting the risk. The risk that drivers continue to disconnect. That frustration grows. That motivation drops. And eventually, that some of them start walking away. But changing direction carries its own risk. Because it means admitting that the current vision isn't working. And in a sport built on precision, control, and authority, that's not easy to do. But here's the truth that sits at the center of all of this. Formula One can survive technical problems. It can survive competitive imbalance. It can even survive controversial decisions. But it cannot survive losing its drivers. Because without drivers fully committed, fully connected, fully invested, everything else loses meaning. And that's the reality the FIA is now facing. Not a regulation issue. Not a technical debate. But a moment where the future of the sport depends on one simple question. Can they give the drivers back what they're losing? Because if the answer is no, then what we're witnessing right now is not just tension. It's the beginning of a shift that could redefine Formula One forever. And if that shift really begins, there is no going back. Because Formula One doesn't change slowly when pressure reaches this level. It snaps. A moment where everything that was ignored suddenly becomes urgent. Where decisions that were delayed are forced into action. And that moment is closer than it seems. Because right now, behind closed doors, conversations are changing. Not about performance. Not about upgrades. About direction. About identity. About what this sport is becoming. And more importantly, what it risks losing. Because when drivers start questioning the foundation, it forces everyone else to do the same. Teams, engineers, even the FIA itself. And suddenly, the focus is no longer on the next race. It's on the next era. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. Because Formula One is already committed. Long-term regulations. Engine projects. Massive investments from manufacturers. Billions spent based on a vision that now is being challenged. And that creates tension at the highest level. Because changing direction now doesn't just affect racing. It affects everything. Money. Partnerships. The future of the sport. But at the same time, not changing might cost even more. Because if the drivers continue to disconnect, if the spectacle loses its authenticity, if the racing stops feeling real, then the damage becomes visible. To fans, to sponsors, to the entire world. And that's the scenario no one wants to reach. But here's where everything finally comes together. Because this is no longer about whether the rules are perfect. They never are. It's about whether the drivers still believe in them. Because belief is what makes Formula One work. Belief that this is the highest level. Belief that what they're doing matters. Belief that the fight is real. And once that belief starts to fade, everything else follows. But now, there's only one question left. The one that will define everything moving forward. Will the FIA react in time? Or will the drivers force the change themselves? Because if it's the second, then what happens next won't be controlled. It won't be planned. It will be a reaction. And reactions in Formula One are never small. They reshape eras. They redefine power. They change who wins before the lights even go out. And if we've reached that point, then what we're watching right now is not just tension. It's the beginning of a turning point. The moment where Formula One is forced to decide what it wants to be before the drivers decide for it.